Last year I did what would end up being the most popular video on this channel, which was a direct comparison of the 1979 broadcast miniseries version of Stephen King's Salem's Lot to its 2004 TNT basic cable counterpart. If you haven't seen that, I'll link it in the description in this video, as well as at the end of the video, but my consensus on that was that the 1979 film was a product of both its time and the medium it was released on. Basically, I got a lot of heat for saying that it was dated even during its day, as the audience for it was a bit more conservative than what your standard horror watchers at the time were used to. Since it aired on broadcast TV, it wasn't allowed to be too graphic and had to cut out a lot because of that. On top of that, I personally wasn't a fan of turning Barlow into some type of Nosferatu creature. With that being said, it wasn't bad by any means, and the changes it made to the story were well received by audiences, but it just wasn't comparable to what horror films were coming out in theaters at the time in any category. For reference, this came out the same year as the Amityville Horror and Alien. Even from a vampire standpoint, it came out the same year as Dracula 79, which won Best Horror Movie in the Saturn Awards that year. Then when it came to the 2004 basic cable version, my consensus was it did not have the creepy horror vibes of the 79 series, but it did the most to keep many of the side details of the town intact, where the 79 film omitted many of it altogether because of, as I mentioned, some of those stories being a bit too controversial for broadcast TV audiences at the time. I mean, the film pretty much begins with a story about pedophilia. That film, I felt, was more of an intense drama that happened to have vampires in it, and they definitely went for realism in the storytelling and respected the original book's vision of what the main monster looked like over making it a horror just to make it a horror. That's too many series you can watch back to back, be entertained, and not feel like you've watched the same story repeatedly. So does the now 2024 film fall into that category? Well, I'll start with some of the changes I liked, then some of the things I didn't like, and end, of course, on the female vampire factor before giving my final thought. So as far as the changes I liked, and it's a pretty extensive list, here I'll start with the biggest change, and that being the character of Mark being a complete badass. In the other two films, Mark is a kid who kinda just trips and falls into the whole vampire hunting thing after just randomly having the will to be one of the few kids to not fall under the hypnosis tricks of his best friend turned vampire Danny Glick appearing at his window. In 2004, Mark was less mild-mannered, but nonetheless was also portrayed as a wimp who overcame fear out of necessity. In the 2024 film, it's established very early that Mark is a survivor, which makes his actions in the rest of the film make sense. After an incident with bullies at school, he tells his friends that you have to fight back because if you don't, they won't leave you alone, and that explains his motivations for the rest of the movie as the town slowly decays into a horrible den of vampires. He's a horror movie fanatic who, while everyone else is trying to find some logic of what's going on, he's devising plans and going into action. Considering how bumbling many of the adults are in the film and in the actual story in general, this for me is a very welcome change. This also brings me to change number 2 I liked, which was making the horror scenes featuring the Glick brothers matter. Much like in 2004, there was much more effort in the story of the Glick brothers turning than the 79 series did, which over-relied on the boys flying into window scenarios. Once the horror portion starts, if a Glick brother is on camera, something creepy is going to happen and it's not going to be repetitive. Danny being lured outside before being turned by Ralphie and then dying after graphically feeding on the blood that was being transfused to him just came off as a better horror movie element and also made the Danny in the window coming after Mark scene stand out more for modern audiences seeing it for the first time because not only was it kept as it was an iconic moment, but it only happened once, so it doesn't get played out, unlike the 79 film where it happened multiple times. As far as how Barlow is treated, I'm indifferent as far as the decision to make him a copy of the 79 miniseries version. Still not a fan of it, but since the tone of the film overall is darker, it works a bit better. Now on to probably the most controversial part of the movie, which is everything that was left out. This was a book that was formerly turned into 3 and 4 hour miniseries that is now condensed into a 2-hour film, so things will be left out. Or will they? The idea that a lot was left out is somewhat incorrect. They didn't actually leave much out as much as they condensed all the side plots into dialogue and a couple of scenes and used those as Easter eggs that only old school fans would recognize and first time watchers wouldn't think anything of. The main scene for that is here at the drive-in. In the scene, Susan basically gives you a quick rundown of all the side drama that is going on in the town, which is as good a place as any to start talking about the female vampires of the film. For instance, did you know that Ruth Crockett is indeed in this film? For those not familiar, Ruth Crockett is a character in the book who was left out of the 79 miniseries, but included as a main character in the 04 series. She had an abusive father who didn't want her to associate with a handicapped boy in the town, that would eventually result in Barlow talking the handicapped boy into joining him and becoming a vampire, and him then turning her, with a 2000 film showing her as well as the other teens in the town attacking and feeding on her father. Well, none of that happens in the 2024 film. Well, almost none of it. This is Ruth Crockett. We see her and her boyfriend sneaking their friends into the drive-in during the side plot throwaway scene. By the end of the film, we then see that she has indeed been turned into a vampire. In fact, it's pretty much shown that all the girls who went to the drive-in are turned, as Ben and Mark are stuck running from them in the movie's third act. As far as the other two main female vampires of the story, they are also still there. Marjorie Glick is another character whose screen time is cut dramatically from the other two miniseries versions. The mother of Ralphie and Danny here is limited to just the scenes where she is reacting to her boys being missing and the aforementioned Danny death scene, but her death itself is not seen on camera. We do get her morgue revival intact, and though you don't see her face after she turns, this one scene in my eyes tops any other version from a horror factor, and I would have loved to have gotten to experience it in a theater with how intense it was played out. The first thing that came to mind seeing it wasn't that we don't see Mrs. Glick's face, but that this is exactly how people seeing a dead woman coming to life for the first time should act. Confused, panicky, and freaked out. Alfre Woodard as Dr. Cody especially made this scene amazing. Lastly, we have the character of Susan. One of the things I preferred was the cleaning up of how the main character, Ben Mears, meets his eventual love interest, Susan Norton. In '79, she's a college student that he creepily approaches in the woods while she's studying. While it's not unrealistic that it would happen this way, Susan and Ben's relationship is pretty rushed in the original miniseries, feeling like the filmmakers needed to push it as much as possible over forwarding other plots to make the film's ending make sense. Much like in the '04 series, in this one their relationship happens a lot more naturally. In this case, she replaces the character Bonnie Sawyer from the '79 film as the woman who works at the housing place Ben goes to when he first comes to town and is encouraged to go after Ben to spite her mother, who never wants her to leave Salem's Lot. Unlike in these last two cases, in this case I still do prefer the '79 Susan as a love interest, and especially the scene of her turning at the end over any other iteration. Here, Susan's turn is not a twist, and in fact reminds me a lot of Amy Peterson's turn in the Fright Night 2 remake, where she acts as more of a mid-boss that has to be defeated before you get to the final villain. In this version, she gets attacked while going home to warn her mother about what's going on in the town, just to find out that Mom is already under Barlow's control. Ben tries to take her to the church to get Dr. Cody to try to save her after she was bitten, but by that time she's already reacting negatively to being in a church, meaning she's already been turned. She then escapes before the doctor can stake her. We don't see her again until the film's final act, as Ben tries to hide from Barlow at the concession stand of the town drive-in, which is where Susan is waiting for him. No loving speech this time, though. Susan has only one goal, and that's to feed on Ben, culminating in a fight scene between the two, where he eventually impales her with a wooden chair leg. So what's my final opinion? Well, I've seen the reaction to the film is split, and my personal view is I liked it, and I liked it a lot. Many of the negative reactions I've seen, at least to me, seem to be from people who are attached to the book or the '79 series and were looking for a blow-by-blow remake, not understanding this film was A, made to be seen in theaters in one sitting and not over a couple of days, and B, made for an audience too young to have ever seen the '79 series or cared to read the 1975 book and are getting the story with fresh eyes. It's just a shame the world prevented the film from being given a full theatrical release, because the mood and the sound of the film I feel would have been better in a dark theater with surround sound, but even without it, it's probably the best horror vampire film to come out in years. For those who are attached to the '79 series or younger fans who want to watch it for a comparison, Max has also uploaded that to their platform. But I feel safe to say if you haven't watched the '79 series and decided to watch it after this one, it probably won't be that enjoyable experience, as the story is much slower paced, with the scares, if you find them even scary, to be few and far between. So what is your opinion? Let's discuss in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you like these recaps, please leave a like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to know every time I update. There is now an option to be a channel member where you'll get access to exclusive recaps from late night vampire catalogs like Showtime, Cinemax After Dark, USA Up All Night, and much more. If you want to help my channel grow, please check out my Patreon, where members can get exclusive content that can't be uploaded on YouTube, along with download options. Link is in the description.